Well, the Vols getting the week off. They are riding high after that 4-0 start. A pair of top 25 wins, including Saturday on CBS against Florida. Schedule gets even tougher after next week's game at LSU. There are three SEC opponents after that LSU game. The next three all in the top 10, including number 1 and number 2, Georgia and Bama. Tennessee doing it with offense, averaging 559 yards per game. Quarterback Hendon Hooker, he accounted for over 450 yards himself against Florida. A well-earned idle week for the Vols this week. Let's get Josh Pate in here for some bold predictions on HQ. Josh, Tennessee's not playing this week, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about them. Give us a bold prediction for the Vols moving forward the rest of this season.
Well, Noah and I fought about this earlier this morning because I didn't know how bold I wanted to get. But if we were to recalibrate the whole season total thing and we were to ask, all right, what's an updated win-loss total for Tennessee? Certainly if you went 9.5, I would go over now because everyone in Knoxville is looking and saying, all right, we got past Florida. We know that our offense is exactly what we hoped it would be and thought it would be. So we know we got Bama coming. We're going to be a dog there. We know we got to go to Georgia. We're going to be a dog there. But even if we lose those, shouldn't we win every other game? Look at the schedule here. They go at LSU. They'll be favored there, Christopher. I know that because Mississippi State was favored down there a couple of weeks ago. They've got Kentucky at home. They'll be favored there. They've got games against Missouri. They'll be favored at South Carolina, at Vanderbilt. I think 10-2 is now fair to be looked at as a reasonable expectation. Tennessee fans, because you're a fan, it's reasonable to look at that now as the floor. And if that's the case, this goes from being a nice, solid SEC team, Chris, to potentially a New Year's Six bowl team. And certainly in year 2 of Josh Heupel and knowing what they had to go through to overhaul that roster, that would be a huge deal for them.
It's a fascinating race right now to see who's going to be the third best team in the SEC and maybe challenge an Alabama and a Georgia. More on that in just a moment. Let's move on to Florida State. They're into the top 25. They've got 3 straight ranked opponents coming up, beginning with this week, we hope, against Wake. Now, that game's scheduled to be in Tallahassee. We'll see if it happens that day. Are you willing to make a bold prediction based on the hurricane and where this game might be played and when?
I'm willing to bet that Wake Forest needs to hope that thing gets moved because I don't think that rain and wind is exactly conducive to that offense. But I think we'll hear something on that probably next 24 hours. But let's just say they play it in a parking lot somewhere in Utah, so weather is not a factor. The fact of the matter is Florida State is one of the quietest surprises in the country right now, and they played a game totally off everyone's radar last week. They played Boston College. They were favored by 17.5. But here's the thing. They're riding high. Success is unfamiliar to them right now. That was one of those classic games where we know how college football works. You could have seen them stumble. That could have been a game where we were all texting each other in the fourth quarter. Hey, look, Florida State out of nowhere, they're struggling with Boston College. Instead, they handled them. They beat them convincingly. They took care of business. That's what good teams do. They beat bad teams convincingly when they face them. And now we go back to week 1. And remember how everyone drew conclusions. Mimo always said, Chris, don't draw conclusions. Just make observations in week 1. Everyone thought that LSU was terrible because they lost to Florida State. Well, now all of a sudden, losing to Florida State close is not such a thorn in your paw. It's not a feather in the cap yet. But Florida State, man, with how wide open the ACC appears to be, if they just keep playing at the level they're playing right now, who knows what happens in this conference? This is not the Big Ten with Ohio State up there. It's not the SEC with Bama and Georgia. This conference could be wide open, and it's crazy to say this, but Florida State could be a player in that conference.
Well, let's talk about the big game in that conference this week as we continue on with our bold predictions here with Josh Pate. It's kind of an under-the-radar game because there's so many great matchups this week. You're going to Mississippi. We'll talk about that game in a minute. We got Alabama, Arkansas on CBS. But the lone top 10 matchup, NC State at Clemson. What's your bold prediction for that one?
I think NC State's going to win the game. And I think it's been circled. It's their Super Bowl. We all know that. But I think last week, DJ Uiagalelei for Clemson had the best game of his career statistically. And so you can look at the numbers, and I certainly don't want to take anything away from him. When you go back and watch the game, there were a lot of balls that receivers made really good plays on. It wasn't exactly timing and rhythm. It was just more our athletes are better than yours. And what I wonder is I wonder if we're looking at a totally different game stylistically this week, because you're looking at a totally different defense stylistically and athletically when it comes to NC State. They can limit you. They did it last year against Clemson. The moment's not going to be too big for NC State. They've already faced them. They already beat them last year. They go on the road now. Whether you like it or not, the way that this game works is sometimes in college football, one game defines your season. And this is the game. If you're going to define a season for NC State, this is the game. The ACC is so lopsided, there could be 4 or 5 teams in this division better than the other division. And so if you lose to Clemson, you essentially trail them by a game and a half, and your best hope is for them to, I don't know, suffer multiple upsets down the road. They already played Wake and beat them, so that's out of the way. Clemson just doesn't have a tough schedule, and so if you're going to take them down, this is the spot to take them down. You've got it to do. You take control of it, and then if NC State does, they can take control of their own destiny. It's really important to note, if you look at the lower right now, this line is under a touchdown, and Clemson has home field advantage baked into that. Odds makers are telling you these teams are pretty evenly matched. You give them home field, you bump it up to 6.5, play ball. I think NC State's got a good shot to pull it off.
NC State 6.5-point dogs in that game. Josh says bold prediction, they're going to win outright. Let's go to the game that you're taking the Every Given Saturday tour to, and that entire state of Mississippi. You're going to Oxford because it's a great matchup in the SEC between a couple of teams that don't always get the shine. Ole Miss, Kentucky. Big week in that state, not just in that town.
Yeah, Magnolia Week, I guess, is how we could brand it and probably sell it. But I look at 2 matchups there. The one that we're going to be at is Kentucky Ole Miss. I don't think people in the preseason were saying, hey, watch that one be undefeated versus undefeated, but it is. And same line, ironically. Home team laying 6.5. You've got home field baked in there. Look at the other game, A&M Mississippi State. That game has ballooned. The line on that thing has gone all the way from about 1.5 or 2 at the open up to 6.5. It's crossed several key numbers. I look at my little computer model over here that's puttering along just above 50% against spread this year. It loves Mississippi State. So let's say that happens. Let's say Mississippi State takes down A&M. I think half the country would view that as an upset, not even aware that it's actually Mississippi State favored, because they're all looking ahead to A&M Bama next week. And we'll get to that when we get to that. But if Mississippi State wins that game, Chris, in the computer model world, they're bordering on top 10 status. The computer models are much higher on Mississippi State than pollsters are. And then Ole Miss, if they take care of Kentucky, that's their first big challenge of the year. You could have Ole Miss, you could have Mississippi State, both top 10, top 15 caliber teams, and they're both in what I still regard as the toughest division in college football, that being the SEC West. It could be that everyone's focus is elsewhere, but by the time the dust settles on Saturday, the state of Mississippi owns all the headlines.
I want to see you at the Egg Bowl at the end of this season. Wouldn't that be something? Let's stay in that division, Josh, with your last bold prediction. We've had 3 coaches fired in the last 3 weeks. Is that streak going to continue on to a 4th week?
If the reports were accurate, and I have no reason to believe they're not, and Brian Harson's future was actually riding on the outcome of last week's game. Number one, it's some of the most baseless, ignorant logic you could ever use to operate an athletic department. But understand who we're talking about here. It's happened before at Auburn. If that's the case, I do not think Auburn is able to pull the game out Saturday. And if they're not able to pull the game out Saturday, it could very well spell the end of the Brian Harsin era. And at that point, you could ask me, okay, who's next? My question back to you would be, I don't know, Chris, because I don't know who's making the hire, because they don't have an athletic director right now. And then you could say back to me, but Josh, let's be real. Does the athletic director call the shots around there even when they do have one? And I would say, boy, Chris, you really know your Auburn football. And mind you, you haven't had to say a word here. I'm just carrying on the entire conversation for both of us. But that's kind of the way it works around there. And here's the other thing to keep in mind, and we're looking way into the future if this does happen, and I believe it will eventually. The other question is, what kind of talent pool, what kind of candidate pool are you drawing from? Because coaches aren't stupid. They see the drama that goes on down there, and anyone with options, which is the pool you're going to hopefully be choosing from, anyone with options is going to look and say, but I could go here, here, or here, and they don't have this checkered track record like you do. How do you sell me on Auburn? Who is selling me on Auburn? So this is going to be a story to watch. Firstly, when does Brian Harsin get the axe? And then after that, who are they choosing from? Can they get a guy with options, or do they have to go way off the radar? Arkansas went off the radar and it worked out for them. I'm not saying it can't work out. I'm just saying that's the road far less traveled at the highest levels of college football.
Yeah, I remember when Gene Chizik came in with, I don't know what he was at Iowa State, 2-20 or something like that. They won a national championship.
5-19.
5-19, yeah, because that's what that guy was screaming at the airport when he landed. 5-19, 5-19. Wins the title. Josh Pate with us here on CBS Sports HQ, giving bold predictions for the week. Enjoy your trip to Mississippi. We'll hear him on the Late Kick podcast as well. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Sundays, live at 8 Eastern on YouTube and Facebook.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.